This is the Nikon EL2, and much like the Nikon FT3, this really spelled the end of the line for Nikon's full-size cameras for the amateur market. The Nikon EL2 arrived in 1977, as did the Nikon FT3. And like the Nikon FT3, the Nikon EL2 had some history behind it. There was the original Nikon EL, followed by the ELW, W stood for winder, film winder, and then this model, which then became a Nikon camera rather than a Nikon. So the EL2 just says EL on the front of the prism housing. On the back, however, it was marked EL2. This was a full-size camera in every sense of the word, both in terms of its size as well as its weight, and its weight was considerable. The EL2 was a slight improvement over the ELW in that it now accepted Nikon AI lenses. AIs, of course, stood for auto-indexing. Prior to that, when you mounted a lens, there was a small metering prong that stuck out from the body, and you would mate that with the prong on the lens. And once the lens was mounted, you would then quickly turn it from maximum aperture to minimum aperture. Then your camera would be properly mated to the lens for open aperture metering. Nikon's AI lenses did away with the need to do that, and it was just open aperture metering with no need to do anything special with the lens other than mount it correctly to the body. Let's take a look at some of the features of the Nikon EL2. So from the front of the camera, obviously you had the body and you had the Nikon branding. This was a depth of field preview lever. This was your self-timer, of course. Self-timer serves two roles. One is to delay the photo, and that's by turning it down. And the second is by pushing it toward the lens mount. When you push it toward the lens mount, it locks the exposure. In auto exposure, you would push this lever toward the body, like this. Then you would focus and take your photo, and it would hold that exposure, whatever shutter speed the camera had selected. This was a feature that was repeated in the Nikon FE. On the other side of the camera is this small little switch, and this was a mirror lockup. I'll show you. The mirror lockup actually served two purposes. One is use it as a mirror lockup, and two, I'll explain in a moment. This is your lens release button. Moving to the top of the camera, you have your exposure compensation dial. And so how you change that was you press a small silver button and then move the dial. And once you were finished doing that, it would actually sort of click into place. Here's your rewind crank, fold out rewind crank. And this here is your film speed setting dial with speeds running from 12 all the way to 3200. On the consumer market, there really were no ASA 12 film speeds, although it did go down to 25. I think if you were probably wanted to underexpose, obviously, or overexpose, you would set it to 12. On the other side, well, here's your hot shoe, just a traditional hot shoe, and you'll notice there were no extra contacts, so there was no dedicated flash unit available for this. This is your shutter speed dial, with speeds running from 1/1000th of a second all the way down to 8 seconds plus B. Also had an automatic switch. So this was aperture priority automatic. That is, you selected the aperture and the camera would then select the shutter speed based on the amount of light that was coming through the lens. I believe the Nikon EL2 used silicon blue metering cells. Whereas if you recall, the Nikon FT3 used, it still used a CDS meter, cadmium sulfide. Silicon blue was noted for being very fast reacting, so your meter would react very quickly to changes in light, whereas a CDS meter tended to be a little bit more leisurely, as they would say. This collar that surrounds the shutter release is an on-off switch for the meter. However, in this camera, it's not working. Here's your film advance. Now the film advance was a single stroke film advance, and so if you only partially wound it when you When you brought the film advanced to this position, you would have to complete the single stroke. On the back of the camera, it's fairly simple. You just have your eyepiece, and you have your battery check button and your battery check LED. To open the camera, it was slightly different. In order to pull up on your rewind knob to open the back, there's a small little lever. You would push it toward the back while pulling up on the rewind knob at the same time. Then you could pop open the back. In the back, you'll find a fairly traditional layout. Film runs from left to right. You have your film rails here, and you have a vertically traveling metal shutter. This was an electronically controlled metal shutter, and more specifically, it was a battery-dependent metal shutter. Without a battery in place, or if the battery died, you had one single speed of roughly 1/90th of a second. Even your B setting wouldn't work, so you only had one option if your battery died. However, it did give you one shutter speed. Here's your pressure plate, and of course the role of the pressure plate is to keep the film flat against your film rails so that when you take a photo, you get as sharp as photo as possible, and that of course is always dependent upon you having a high quality lens that is capable of recording a sharp image. Here's your take-up spool, sprocket wheels, and this little slot here is to insert the leader of your film. On the bottom of the camera, you have your contacts for the automatic winder that was available. And here's your coupling for the winder. So unlike some cameras, there was no circular plate to remove in order to couple this camera to a winder. I do not have the winder. Here's your tripod socket, and it is in alignment with the center of the lens. And this is your press and release rewind button. You'll notice that this camera has a very small ding here. I don't know what happened. I bought this camera used, so I just don't know what happened. The Nikon EL2 has a fixed focusing screen, that is, it's not replaceable by the user. Inside the viewfinder, you'll see a center image with a center split image to help you focus. And that's something that's, I think, appreciated with any single lens reflex camera. To the left is a shutter speed scale, and with a meter needle that will float up and down to indicate whatever shutter speed has been selected. There is a small green bar. When the shutter speed dial selector is set to A, the green bar moves into the upper region where there is an A. Once you move it off of A, the green bar then is superimposed over whatever shutter speed you have selected. In this mode, you will still have the needle moving up and down, so this allows you to manually select the shutter speed according to what the needle is indicating. And then, of course, you're always free to either select a faster or slower shutter speed, whatever you want. I mentioned that the mirror lockup lever serves two purposes, and of course, one is to lock up the mirror. The second is, well, you're going to notice that there's no place to insert a battery. So, the reason, and there's no other place where a battery might be, so the reason is the battery is stored in the base of the mirror box. This uses a PX28 6-volt battery. So once you have flipped up the mirror, you then open this small trap door. You insert the battery far into the back of the, near the back of the camera. You close this, and you're ready to go. One complaint about this camera is that this thing eats through batteries very quickly, regardless of whether it's on or off. And I actually can confirm that's true. I think I had a 6-volt battery, a fresh 6-volt battery in here, and I think it exhausted it in roughly 2.5 weeks. And that was really barely even using the camera. There's no way it should go through a battery that quickly. The Nikon EL2 accepted any Nikon lens. It actually would take any pre-AI and any AI and even AIS lenses. If you're using a pre-AI lens, what you would do is there's a small coupling lever. And so if you use a pre-AI lens, there's a small pin right on the side here. It's almost like a little mushroom cap. So press that in, flip up that lever and you can mount your pre-AI lens. As I recall, then you're using the camera in stop-down metering mode. Not a terrible thing, slightly inconvenient, but not a big deal. This was probably Nikon's last all-metal camera. Well, of course, except for the F2. I'm not sure about the F3 and later models, but they probably had some composite materials in there. This one, though, is largely metal. Let's see what it weighs. So this is pretty hefty. This comes in at 2 pounds, 3 ounces. So almost 2¼ pounds, you could say. So that's a good sized camera. Now, within a year or so, it was replaced by the Nikon FE, which I'll cover in a later video. So the Nikon FE with the same lens mounted, which is the f2 50mm Nikkor, it is 1 pound 12 ounces. So that's going to be, let's see, 4, 5, 6 ounces less. 1 pound 12 ounces versus, see, even the body alone almost weighs as much as the Nikon FE with its lens. And with the lens, it weighs 2 pounds 3, we could say 2 pounds 3 ounces. What about just the body alone? So 1 pound 11 ounces versus 1 pound 4 ounces. So that's a difference of 7 ounces, or almost half a pound. Almost half a pound. Obviously, the Nikon EL2 is a very sturdy camera. There's no flex to the body. And when you hold this camera, you know you're holding an old school camera. In fact, you could really think of this as an old school camera with some modern electronics in it. As I mentioned, there's this little switch that sits at the front of the collar, that sits around the shutter release. When you want the camera turned on or want the meter active, you would push it this way, and in order to turn the meter off, you would pull it that way. You would pull it to the right. Nikon, unlike Canon, always did a good job of supporting its older line of lenses right up through the digital age. Whereas when Canon developed the EOS cameras, it really cut off the FD mount forever. As I mentioned in a previous video, Canon really orphaned that mount. And so that's the Nikon EL2, the second one-year wonder from Nikon, the other being the Nichromat FT3. If you can find one in good condition, they're very sturdy cameras. It will certainly last my lifetime, and very likely yours. And of course, there are a large number of excellent Nikon lenses at your disposal on the used market. So if you're really looking to do something different and you don't mind a heavier camera, go for it. So would you want a camera this heavy today? As I've mentioned in the past, there are times when a heavier camera will give you a more stable platform. Of course, there's always that tipping point where a camera is too heavy. With this camera, it almost is just shy of being too heavy. No doubt it is a very sturdy camera. I wouldn't call it massive, but it is one of the last full-size cameras. So looking at the two cameras side by side, you can clearly see how much taller, shoulder to shoulder, as we like to say, you can clearly see how much taller the Nikon EL2 is. It's not that much taller, but it is a taller camera. What about back to back? So back to back, the Nikon EL2 is also wider, so it's both wider and taller, and of course heavier, because this uses some plastic in its construction, not its internal construction, but top deck and some other parts. Whereas this is still primarily a metal camera. Obviously, the lens flange to film plane distance is going to remain the same, because you couldn't really alter that. Otherwise, if you mounted one lens on one camera, one lens on the other camera, you would never achieve proper focus. And so how do I rate the Nikon EL2? I rate this camera as a solid 8.8, which is just under the 8.9 that I've given to the Nichromat FT3. Although that video does not contain a rating, because I started rating these after I had posted that video. Although this camera succeeds in most areas, it does fall down in durability and reliability, and that would be primarily because of the failure of the battery switch and the rapid depletion of the battery, of the rather expensive 6-volt battery. And for that reason, I had also downgraded build quality. Although build quality itself is rather high, I think reliability of electronics goes into the build quality. Of course, Nikon had no idea that 15 to 20 years after its release, that all of a sudden certain things would go haywire, with battery conservation being one of those things. And this is my look at the Nikon EL2, the final camera in the Nichromat and then Nikon EL series, debuting and ending in 1977. And that brings us to the end of this video. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And if you'd like to leave a comment, feel free to do so below or send me an email at contact@camera-talk.net. Don't forget to check out my channel for videos about other cameras, and see you on the next video.